And thank you, everyone. So nice to see you here on a Sunday afternoon. I'm very excited about our upcoming program. It is my first time that I'm giving this lecture, and I'll tell you why in a second, how it all happened and how it all developed. As Yael noted, I am opening the chat this session since I believe that a lot of you will have things to say and comment about my theory. Because again, I am presenting you with my ideas. It's not something that has been academically researched, because I'm talking about current affairs. And probably most of you have lived through many of these occasions that I'm going to note. So I would be happy that if you want to share or leave your questions till the end. I am going to try and leave more time than usual for questions in the end. Okay, so I'm going to head on and I am going to share my screen. And it's nice because we are doing this on Women's History Month. So I feel that it's very appropriate. Okay, 1 second. Well, you're seeing all my slides when you're not supposed to yet. Why? Okay. So, second, here we go again. So, as many of you may have noticed, Golda Meir, who was the 4th Prime Minister of Israel, is now back in fashion. And I can just show you this cute, I don't know if it's cute actually, this very portraying figure of Golda Meir, more as a current day hipster, somebody with a very stylish haircut. She's smoking her cigarette, which she always did, in a more contemporary representation. And this is happening more and more since there is a movie starring Helen Mirren that just came out, hopefully in the cinema in just a few months. And there's going to be there are TV shows and a lot of different pop culture starring Golda Meir has recently, in the past few years, popped up. So my question during this next 40, 50 minutes is, why Golda and why now? It's a bit surprisingly, and we're going to look at this from 2 different aspects. But before we begin, I want to share with you a little bit about Golda's history, and also how did I get to this topic. Since Shirel said in her presentation in the beginning that I am a curator of modern art in the Tel Aviv Museum of Art, I do not research history or Israeli history that is not connected to art. And how did I get to all of this? And that's because during my stay here in Denver, I was encountered with the Golda Meir house. And not many of you probably know that Golda Meir lived in Denver for 2 years during her high school years. And there is a house dedicated to Golda Meir on the Auraria campus. That means the campus of Denver University and a few other colleges. And it's a museum house. And together with the director, Mrs. Lena Fishman, we are trying to reorganize the exhibition and make it much more accessible. So during my stay here in Colorado, I came to know a little bit more about Golda, and I want to share a bit about her history because it's going to be relevant to what we're going to talk about later on. So Golda, she was born as Goldie Mabovich, and she was born in Russia, in Kiev, Russia, in 1898. And you can see she's on the far left with that nice white bow. She was born to a family, a traditional family. She was the middle, she had 2 sisters. The oldest sister is in the middle. Her name is Shayna, and the younger sister is Clara. And she says in her autobiography that one of her earliest memories is her father blocking up the doors because there's a pogrom, and Russians are trying to go into their house to murder them. So her father, when she was young, left Kiev to America to try and find a new future for her family. And Goldie and her mother and two sisters joined him later on, and they moved to Milwaukee. Okay, and that's where there was a whole bunch of immigrants together with them, trying to start off a new place for their families. Now, Goldie was a brilliant student. She was very successful. In a very short time, she managed to master the English language, and she was an excellent student. And even when she was a young girl, she had very strong instincts for justice, and she organized this fund to collect money for children who couldn't afford school books when she was only 11, okay? So we can see that she was very active from a very young age with very strong opinions. And that's really what happened how did she get to Denver, Colorado? Because her family was in Milwaukee. So opinionated Golda wanted to, after her school, she wanted to continue her studies into high school, okay? And at the time, she wanted to graduate and become a teacher. But at the time in the state of Milwaukee, teachers could not marry, okay? It was only a profession for single women. Now, Goldie did not want to marry in a young age and become a housewife. She wanted to pursue her own education and her own profession, and her parents did not allow that. So, with the help of her best friend, she ran away to her sister who was in Denver. Now, why was Shayna in Denver, her older sister? Because Shayna contracted tuberculosis when she was working in Milwaukee. And many people in the turn of the century in the United States were suffering from tuberculosis, and there wasn't really a cure or medicine. And a lot of them were advised to come to the high altitude of Colorado, to the dry weather here, and to heal in these very big hospitals from tuberculosis. And that's what Goldie did. And she was here with her husband. His name was Sam. They knew each other already from Kiev, and their little daughter. Now, Goldie ran away from her parents in Milwaukee, and she spent 2 years here in Colorado with her sister, okay? And this is a bit, I've showed you the interior of the house. The house is a very small 3-bedroom duplex that they shared with another family, but it was their own house. And it's very important to understand that these immigrants from a very poor background managed to secure themselves a little place for themselves. Now, during her time in Denver, she attended high school, North High School. You can see her in the picture. She was a very brilliant student. She had direct A's in all of her subjects, except for one subject, and that's art. And you can see this is her report card from Northside High School. And in the evenings, she used to help her sister in the kitchen. And here is something very important what happened, because a lot of immigrants who were in Denver also attending maybe a treatment for tuberculosis, but Russian immigrants came to Goldie and to Shayna and Sam's kitchen, and they sat and they discussed current affairs. They discussed ideology of socialism. They discussed Zionism. And it is here even that Goldie met her husband, Meir. Then later on, she'll move back to Milwaukee, and they'll get married, and they'll come to Palestine, to the state of Israel. So in her memoirs, she even says, it was in Denver that my real education began. And that's a great significance for the Denver house, for the Golda Meir's house in Denver, which is the only house that is also in America and in Israel to commemorate her as Golda Meir. Okay, and we're going to talk about that. Why aren't there other places? Just to finish up, oh, here there's another picture. I tried as much as I can to do a close-up, but you can see there's a mem and a gimel, okay, inscribed on this cutlery. And this is a gimel, and this is a mem, Golda and Meir, okay? That this was a gift that they received from their friends when they made Aliyah, when they came to Palestine. Now, just as a last remark, I want to explain how did this house stay, okay, preserved? Because in the 1980s, you can see the picture, this was this condition of the heart. It was nearly abolished. It was part of something, the Boys Club of Colorado, and they wanted to pull it down and have a tennis court. And in a very amazing collaboration of Senator Pat Schroeder, who was the first woman senator from Colorado, which is important because she felt a connection to Golda, even she wasn't Jewish. And also a few members, not necessarily from the Jewish community, which is interesting to understand. They managed to save the house from destruction, and they managed to put it on a truck eventually and move it to the historic district where it is today in the Aurora campus. Okay, so we're very proud of this, and we're very proud of the preservation that the people of Colorado managed to do it together in order to keep Golda's house here in Denver. So now that you have a little bit of background and a little bit of history about Golda, I want to talk and show you a few examples of representations of Golda Meir's character or presence in today's culture. And the first thing is, of course, the film that was already premiered in the Berlin Festival. And you can see Helen Mirren, and they got a lot of publicity because of the amazing makeup work that was done on Helen Mirren and how much she looks like Golda Meir, and she does an amazing job in her character. I've heard that there's mixed reviews, but again, the question is why today a leading director, he is an Israeli director, but he's been working many years already in Hollywood, why Guy Nativ thought it was relevant to revisit today Golda Meir. The story of the film is her time during the Yom Kippur War. So it's a specific period of time, but still, how come this is what he wants to work on? And also there's an upcoming TV show where Barbra Streisand is the one who's going to produce it, and acting is going to be Shira Haas. She's an Israeli actor. She did other TV series also about Golda Meir in a leading TV program. And this is only what's happening today. In the past, in 1982, which is not long after Golda Meir died, she died in 1978, Ingrid Bergman, which was a leading actor, it is nearly one of her last movies that she did. They did a whole movie about Golda Meir. And it was very well received. It had Emmy nominations. It won 3 awards, and also the Golden Lion. So it had a community. It had people watching it. It attracted people. But the question is, was this always an American narrative? Okay, there seems to be in the past times a lot of attraction in American culture. And we can see that happening also, let's say, twice on the cover of Time magazine. And we know that whoever reaches the cover of Time magazine is somebody that is well thought of, is somebody that is part of the, something that has something to say about the society at the time. It's a landmark, and Golda Meir did it twice. Once in 1969, after she became the prime minister, and later on when she was selected to be one of the 100 influential women of the 20th century. So we can see that in America, her figure was talked about, was even celebrated. on the cover of Time magazine. And she was a well-known figure. And here I also want to mention that last Friday morning, I was listening to the radio in the car, NPR, and they said, after the news at 8 o'clock, they say, okay, what happened years ago? So they said in 1969, Golda Meir was elected the 4th Prime Minister of Israel, this day in 1969. So it's amazing to see that in America, her figure is still relevant. They still mention her. And now we're moving into popular culture. We can see that in a Seinfeld episode in 1992, of course, they have these nonsense debates, right? We all know Seinfeld, and we all know usually, what it's all about. But Seinfeld is saying, who was the ugliest leader of all time? And they're debating, was it Charles de Gaulle? Was it Lyndon Johnson? But finally, when they come to an agreement, who to decide was the ugliest was Golda Meir. And even later on in 2008, she's mentioned as one of the characters in Simpsons. And it's interesting because this is a different generation of people who are watching these TV programs than the people who were living in the time of Golda. Yes, we're talking about the 1960s, 1970s, and this is 2008. It's a different generation, but still her figure, portraying her figure is part of the culture, is still relevant. And I'd like to share with you from a different aspect, Andy Warhol. Now, Andy Warhol, we know always had the ability to find these figures, both as movie stars, but both as politicians and world figures, to find these figures and to make them as an iconic, to portray them as an iconic figure. And he already in 1973, which is really, she was still alive, saw that her figure, her image was something that could be recognizable. And he didn't necessarily need to agree with what her political views or agree with whatever she did. He was looking at how she looked and what could make that, like he takes a Coca-Cola bottle or a Campbell soup and makes it into something like a plaquette. So also he did it with her figure in 1978. And later on in 1980, she was the only Israeli that was part of his series of portraits called 10 Portraits of Jews of the 20th Century. So we have here Kafka, we have here Albert Einstein, we have Leonard Bernstein, we have other, many of them also American figures, the Marx brothers, but Golda Meir is the only Israeli. There's another woman, Gertrude Stein, but she is the only Israeli. So we see that both in different views, both in popular culture, both as cover of the magazine, as a historical figure in the United States, she always surfaced into the arena. The thing is, what happens at the same time in Israel? Or how is her figure portrayed in Israel? I'm just going to check also, I haven't looked at the chat and I know that I should, but okay, I can see some good questions. And I know that many of you have also TV shows, yes, have also remembered her own memories. And you know what, I'd like you to share maybe in one word, when you hear the name Golda Meir, what do you think of? What does she portray in your mind? Okay, and that you can share that in the chat to everyone, and we can see if there's some sort of common denominator for everyone. Before we move on to the Israeli side, across the Atlantic Ocean, because something else is happening here. So I think the most of our crowd is American, and probably most of us have lived through the time of Golda Meir. So let's hear a little bit about your strength. I see a lot of strength. Mother of Israel, strong woman, chutzpah, intelligence. Okay, very positive, strong leader, a hero. Okay, she was tough. Okay, so I see the majority of people who are sharing what they feel about Golda Meir is a very positive, a woman, a hero, somebody to look up to. And also in Israel, much of her figure was looked up as the only, well, the quote is the only man in the cabinet, and that's the quote that really Ben-Gurion said on Golda. She did not like it, okay? She did not like being called the only man. But that just shows you that what they saw, she was the woman, she was in fact the only woman, and we can see her marching here with a row of men next to her. But in fact, her womanly characters were shifted onto really the strength that she had, the power that she had, and she was like more of a male figure in the fact that what she portrayed. And that's in the beginning of her way. She was very close to Ben-Gurion. She did a very important work in 1947, just before the state of Israel was born. So Ben-Gurion said that he has to travel to America to get funding for the new state of Israel. And she told him, Ben-Gurion, you can't go. Your English is terrible. I will go. And she did. And she arrived in Chicago. She wasn't invited to the United Jewish Congress. She managed to get a spot to speak. And she spoke a very emotional, demanding speech. And in the end of that tour, 2.5 months afterwards, she raised more than $50 million. And at the time, that was a huge amount. And really, that what secured the Israeli forces that could get ammunition and things that they were needed for the beginning of the state. So she was a very, very important figure for Ben-Gurion and for the Israeli cabinet. Later on, she was one of 2 women who signed the Declaration of Independence. Okay, and the other woman, unfortunately, was forgotten from history and should be revisited. But Golda is the only one that afterwards made a career in politics. So she did have a public role, and she was a public figure, but not necessarily. Okay, so let's see what she does in the rest of her career, and then we'll see how much was she loved or not. Because in this picture, we see that she's really embracing, holding young children, probably immigrants. And this was at the time when she was the labor minister, just after the birth of the state of Israel, 1949. And she did very, very important work as a labor minister that until today are the basis of the social welfare that we have in the Israeli state. So she has the Social Security law, and she is the one who promoted maternity benefits, which in fact in America does not happen until today. But in Israel, the young state of Israel that did not have a lot of money, and it had a lot of security concerns and other things, she managed to show the importance of these laws, even though that there were very urgent things happening around her. She promoted housing and road infrastructure. And you have to think, there were thousands, over 700,000 immigrants arriving to Israel during those days. And she had to find places for all of them to live and work. And finally, she also was very important in finding work and making possibility of works for these immigrants. And she says that these 7 years of her being the labor minister were the most demanding and fruitful year for her. She felt that she could really make a change, make a difference, and she liked that position. But afterwards, she moved into the foreign ministry, and then she was in the embassy. And eventually, in 1969, she was elected as the 4th prime minister of Israel. And this is also a very, kind of her characteristic, because she wasn't a lot at home. And we can talk maybe later on a little bit about her as a mother figure, but she had this kind of maybe more grandmother figure. She used to cook once a week. She used to make gefilte fish and chicken soup, and she used to have her very close allies in the political arena come to her kitchen, which until today, it's like a statement, like Hamid Bachon. It's a very closed circle of people that are secure with you and talk about politics and make all of her politics arrangements. And that happened in her kitchen, which is interesting to understand. You know, she was a grandmother. Was she a politician? She was more maybe not necessarily spent a lot of time at home, but when she wanted to feel in a safe space, where did she choose to do it? In her own kitchen. Now, times in Israel are always unstable, as we know today also. But when she was a prime minister, there were a few things that happened. And one of them, in 1971, there was a social movement called the Black Panthers. Yes, they took their name from the American Black Panthers. And this social movement was mainly of immigrants who came from North Africa, and they were protesting about their situation, about their welfare, about they didn't have enough money, about, how do you say, kipuach, Shirel? Discrimination, thank you. And it was a very strong protest at the time, and it really shook the Israeli society. And Golda Meir, in the beginning, did not want to meet with these people. She just felt that these were outlaws, these were hooligans, these were people that were not worth meeting. And eventually she had no choice, because this movement was gaining more and more recognition and more publicity. And she met them eventually, and she really was very patronizing towards them. And she was not nice. And she said to them, they are not nice. And she received a lot of criticism of that, the fact that she could not deal with them on the eye level and could not be more forgiving for their situation. And she was very, very harsh towards them. And of course, and this is what in Israel until today, this is her figure, is the national disaster of the Yom Kippur War. And I still say a national disaster because that's how today in the Israeli society, the Yom Kippur War is still related as a disaster, as something that could be prevented, as something that Golda Meir, even though that she, after a government inquiry, she was cleaned and she was not officially blamed, but people still saw her as the leading figure at the time and was the blame of death of over 200 soldiers and over 2,000 soldiers and 7,000 injured. And really, today, it's amazing. Yes, 50 years afterwards, we still, as the Israeli society has not yet healed from the surprise that happened on the Yom Kippur War. So from becoming the national grandmother, yes, in the beginning of her career, she really related to people and people looked up to her. She became to the national disaster. And we can see it still today, because these are things that Shirel just sent to me from the protests that are happening today in Israel. And they're trying to put her next to the catastrophe that happened in that happened in 1973, the failure that happened in 1973, towards a failure that's happening now in the Israeli government, or also in 2001 with the coronavirus. So her figure in Israeli society still represents somebody that is not worth to commemorate. Her legacy was not looked upon. And we can see this because many of the former prime ministers or politicians have institutions that are called after the name. The Begin Center, Yitzhak Navon Center, Rabin, of course, Peres, but they all have institutions that commemorate their legacy. And Golda Meir, even though she was the only woman, and she did a lot of work on a lot of social issues, and she was crucial for the state of Israel in its early years, may have a few streets around the country and an old 10 shekel bill. And you're thinking, today, if they were somebody who wanted to come forward and say, okay, let's build a park of Golda Meir or a building or a neighborhood Golda Meir, maybe people would say, but we don't want to live in that kind of place, okay? Because she doesn't necessarily remind us of good things. She's lacking any official history or legacy in today. But what is happening and what happened in the past few years? Oh, there's another thing here. What we do know when I grew up, yes, in the army, there's shoes for women that were called Golda shoes, okay? And you can see there's a picture of her. And again, there's something very down to earth with her appearance. And we're going to talk about it in a little bit. That she did not really care to be very fashionable or to be outgoing with her wear. She wanted something comfortable and practical. And these kind of ugly shoes that maybe today are back in fashion, but at the time were not very pretty. They were practical, were called Golda shoes. But what else do we have today? And now I'm moving a few centuries forward, and whoever visited Israel recently knows that a very popular ice cream parlor place that has many, many, many branches all over Israel is called Golda. Now you can say, okay, maybe Golda means gold, that's why they chose the word Golda. But I think still in Israeli society, there, when you say Golda, you understand that they mean Golda Meir. And how come they chose her? What is she to do with ice cream? Is there anything connected to ice cream and Golda Meir? Not necessarily, but they were looking for something that would be recognizable, but in a positive way. And we can see this happening also. Let's say there's little figures now that they're selling, maybe for tourists, maybe just for historical reasons. And you can see the figure of Golda Meir. She's like a cute grandmother, yes, with a pearl necklace, with her gray hair, very big nose, but she's like somebody that you can say, oh, she's like a cute grandmother that we can stay over. How come? Also, we see posters of Golda Meir now in various different ways, sometimes with the quotations, sometimes just in a very promoting design. There are children books of Golda Meir, both in English and in Hebrew, for young generation, that means for kids, and also a recent book that came out for youth. So showing that she is now looked upon as some sort of hero or somebody to look upon, somebody that young people, or especially young girls, can look and see her figure as somebody that they can inspire to. And also posters showing her, look, you can see in this poster, this is taken from the picture that I showed you before, showing her legacy, showing things that she did as part of the Social Security, as part of for young mothers, showing her active in the social arena. And again, it's not only in her legacy, but also in a critical way. If any of you know the TV series, it's a very a satire TV series called Hayehudim Ba'im, The Jews Are Coming. I think maybe even we've had things with them here on CSP. But her figure is portrayed there as in one of their series. And it's when she's like talking to the Black Panthers and showing that she was really like, didn't understand their situation and didn't really know how to relate to them. There's been a documentary on Golda Meir, recent, also showing her complex figure, showing her as a real person. And now I'm like, I want to bring this all together and say, and ask, what is the reason? How come from a figure that was not somebody that, in Israel, I'm saying, okay? People did not want to talk about her. Her legacy was not kept. How come in present today's culture, we see her appearing more and more? And here's an example of graffiti works in Tel Aviv, okay? Young people are doing them. How come they have decided to choose Golda as a figure that they want to portray on the walls of Tel Aviv? And here, I'd like to share with you a few of her own quotes, okay? And we'll try from that to understand maybe what is related for today's culture. So Golda used to say about herself, she said, being ugly, that was a real blessing. Being ugly forced me to develop my inner resources. The beautiful girl has a disability to overcome. So Golda Meir here is talking of something about very personal about herself. Yes, not always people like to talk about their appearance, but she recognized that she wasn't necessarily appointed or promoted for her looks. No, she knew that she tried to take her ugliness, what she called not very flattering looks, into her advantage, to use it as her advantage. And then she even said, fashion is an imposition, a reign of freedom, okay, on freedom. She did not want to be part of the fashion world. She used to choose her clothes according to what's comfortable, according to what suited her on travel. She did not dye her hair. She did not wear posh jewelry. She did not wear fancy clothes or fancy shoes or anything. Her looks were there for her comfort. And she didn't try any further from that. And about women and their place, she said, whether women are better than men, I can say they are certainly no worse, okay? So we know also that she knew that she was in a unique position as a woman in a cabinet full of men, as a woman leader at the time that there were, she was the third woman prime minister in the world at the time. But on the other hand, she didn't necessarily have a great cause or connection to the feminist movement, okay? She didn't call herself feminist. In her cabinet, she didn't try to promote other women, usually the opposite. She made it tough for them. And she didn't like to relate to herself as somebody who was promoting women more than men. She saw women as people, as like men are people. They should be related as the same, at the same time, with the same negotiations, and nothing more or nothing less. And now I'm thinking, and again, this is a theory that I have thought through. It's not necessarily something that you can all agree about it, but I feel that today, people see Golda Meir as a woman among men, a world leader, a tough woman, a serious, a true woman to herself. And how does that represent? And what does that get represented? In things that today we feel are very crucial. We have a lot of I'm talking about a young generation that today is looking on Golda Meir. We have gender identity, which is very important for young generation today. The generation today is highly self-documented in a very superficial world. Yes, people take selfies all the time, or is smiling, or is looking pretty, or is showing the best of themselves. But it's not necessarily what's happening in their own reality. And also a society that celebrates or really praises celebrity and their perfectionist looks. And if we look at all these things, and then we go back to Golda, and we think, how did she look at herself? It was very different, yes? Golda looked herself as a woman, a real woman. She did not care too much for her looks. She was true to herself, and she, even in a way, crossed the gender rules, right? She was a heavy smoker. She did things that were not necessarily considered a feminine, like a feminine leader. So she's not confining to gender roles or looks. It's a new generation now who didn't necessarily know her in the catastrophe of the Yom Kippur War. So they're willing to overcome that and look maybe at something just outside, more superficial. She's a female role model, and we know that's very important because we're looking now all around in our society to bring out from history more and more females. So she's now recognized once again. And she is a real figure. She's complex. As a woman, as a mother, as a leader, she wasn't perfect. And today, maybe there's ability to look at it in a more complex way and not and show that she had good things, good sides and bad sides to her. So this is really what happened, I think, in the Israeli society. In America, it may be a bit different because she was always considered a world famous leader, okay? She was always at the cover of the Time magazine. She had movies, she received attention because in America, she was one of us. Yes, she fulfilled the American dream. She was an immigrant that came to America at a young age. She learned English, she worked hard in her studies, and she managed to become a world leader. So that was something to look up to. And of course, you can't even discard the fact that she spoke fluent English, okay? And she visited America very frequently. That means that she was part of what was happening in everyday life in America. And she was in the news and she was in the politics. And so she was around, she was around at a time when the feminist movement was really active. Even though she did not like to call herself a feminist, they like to say that she was one of the figures that could promote their values. So we see it's a bit of a different attitude, I feel, between Israeli culture and American culture. But on the bottom line, in both countries, and now we can say in many countries, her figure today applies or shows a complex role model for a younger generation. It can be because of her looks, because of the fact that she did not care about her looks. And today we are in a very superficial world. And here is somebody who's showing us something different. It can be because she's a woman, because she has values to herself. And it's something that we are looking to find now more and more. So I hope this was, oh yes, one more thing that I wanted to show, that many of the things that she talked about and thought about are still relevant today, okay? The obstacles that women have to get to power, stories of immigration and success, struggles of women leaders, ongoing anti-Semitism that she experienced in America, it's still experienced, importance of agency and self-fulfillment, and being a liberal Zionist. So all these things are still relevant today, and her fact that her legacy can be researched and can be taught in a very complex way for a wide variety of people. Yes, so that's it. Thank you very much. I'm sure there are many comments and many questions. I'll be happy to answer them and discuss them now.
So thank you very much, Sophia. Yeah, I must say, first, maybe if you can, yeah, great. We can see you full screen now. Yeah, first of all, there are amazing comments in the chat. I will say that there's some people here, which is wonderful to read, like Rose Friedman, who knew Golda, so some interesting stories going on. And I think one of the things that is very apparent, and I'm not sure I'm wondering how many people ever noticed the huge difference between the image of Golda Meir in the US and in Israel. And there was a question about why is she blamed for the Yom Kippur War. I will say before you answer that, just as an Israeli, like I never even asked the question. That's kind of how I grew up. Like as an Israeli, that's just a given fact. And I realize now that someone asked it in the chat, I'm like, oh, I'm not sure I ever like checked why that's the history I learned, which is already very interesting just to see the differences. So if you can maybe say a few words about that, I know it's outside of your expertise, but maybe a few words. And like, are there any other points where you think this split between the American view of her and her personality and the Israeli view on her personality?
So first of all, again, I'm not an historian. And I can only say that like you, Shirel, I grew up, and when you were talking about the Yom Kippur War, Golda was the main figure there, Golda and Moshe Dayan. But it is really important to understand that when there was Vadat Agranat, which was the committee that after the Yom Kippur War checked the, what happened and who is there to blame, they did not find Golda the one to blame, but she still resigned, okay? And she really took it personally. Now, and why until today, she's the one to blame? And then that Moshe Dayan, who was by her side, it's an interesting figure. I don't know, maybe she was easier to blame. She was a frail figure. She was sick. She wasn't strong as Moshe Dayan. She was already not doing so well in internal politics. And that's, people were upset about her. Maybe they were and I think also, there was criticism among the Israeli society saying, why doesn't Golda take care of herself better? Why doesn't she get dressed up more? Like, in a way, people wanted to see a more feminine figure in the front line. And some people were upset that she is representing the country, but she's not, take care of yourself, woman. It's a complex issue. And I think that only today it's being revisited and rechecked, and the archives of the Israeli government are opened up recently, and a lot of research has been done about Golda Meir's position.
I'll just mention from two aspects. One, where there's one aspect where people were talking that there were approaches by Sadat for peace talks that she refused to. Different opinions were about military intel that she disregarded and could have created the surprise of the Yom Kippur War. And as you mentioned, Sophia, when it was checked in the Agranat committee, it was shown that she wasn't the one to blame, but we still grow up in Israel kind of placing it all on her. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm kind of trying to manage between reading all the comments in the chat. Definitely a lot about the place of women in this story and what we place on women. I do want to ask, because I'm curious about Golda Meir as a mother, because we hardly know about that. So if you can say a few words.
So Golda Meir had two children. One of them was called Menachem. I think the daughter was called Sarah. Menachem grew up to be a world musician, and Sarah was one of the people who established Kibbutz Revivim in the Negev. They talk about, I think she wrote a book, Sarah wrote a book, and they were both, and today her grandchildren are more present and they're involved in the Denver Museum. They talk as a figure that it was not easy to, she wasn't present a lot of the time. She was away. She was on trips. She was working very hard, and she was not home. So they do say it was a difficult as a mother. But on the other hand, they say that it was a privilege for them to be part of the young country, to contribute, that her mother was there in very important road points in the young country, and they were part of it. They felt part of it, okay? She hosted people in their own kitchen, okay? When she had important meetings and sometimes she couldn't be at home, she used to take them with them. Like they felt that they could, that they were part of this very important thing, that she dedicated her life to them. So although it was difficult, she was a very difficult mother figure, she wasn't there for them, they do respect her and they do respect her work.
Thank you. Just before I ask you a question, I will mention people are asking about the last slide with the 4 figures. That's not Andy Warhol. It's a contemporary poster, and we will send you in the follow-up email the information about the artist, so you won't have to guess stuff. And I do want to ask you, Sophia, because this is a very personal lecture for you. You kind of went down this journey, and I want to ask if your opinion changed about Golda Meir while you've started this research and kind of looking more into her figure.
It has, and it is interesting because as an Israeli, I grew up and Golda Meir was a persona non grata. Yes, you wouldn't really want to talk to her. And today also in the press, let's say in the book reviews of the book that I showed you that just came out about Golda Meir, she is still very criticized. But I think that the society today is more open to look at the complexity of her figure, okay? Is more open to see the good work that she did, the contribution to the state of Israel. And even though I do have, I think, more criticism on her than a lot of my fellow Americans in the museum, I do feel much more critical about her figure. I do feel that there are a lot of things that can be learned from her agency as a woman, her leading figure, her fact that she had she was very determined, and also as a young girl, as an immigrant, those things that I said in the end. So even though there is a complexity for her figure, and I'm not accepting that she was, such a hero, and I think there are a lot of problematic points in her. If it's the peace process that she didn't really promote too much, if it was her relationship with the Black Panthers, et cetera, but there are things that should be learned about and should be much more brought up front, that they're not as much as they used to.
Thank you. Definitely
Wow.
Eye-opening.
Yes.
And really, I'd say also very interesting. It kind of makes me want to see more kind of taking closer looks about the differences in the way American Jewish culture and Israeli Jewish culture look at differently at figures in our history, because there are a lot of cases like these. So I might send you on on more investigation. I do want to say in the chat, there were lovely comments and recommendations for books and articles. I copied them all. So the latest one was from Naomi Gertz, and thank you. And I'll include them in the follow-up emails so we can all read and learn more. And just before we close, I also want to say, for those of you who are passionate about Israel, we are also having on Sunday, in a week from now, a special program with Dr. Tomer Persiko, who will be speaking about current events from a wider angle. And I recommend joining. And maybe I have here one last question, and I'm curious about it too, so I'm going to ask it. And we have a few more minutes. If you can say a few words about her husband, because I know nothing of him. So if you can say a little.
Okay. So Maurice, as I said beforehand, he met her in Denver in the kitchen of Shayna. She had many suitors at the time, but he was very persistent. When she went back to Milwaukee, he sent her letters. He couldn't send letters to her own home. So he sent letters to her girlfriend, Regina, and she gave the letters to her. So they had this very love affair. And eventually they were about to marry, and she said, listen, we'll get married, but we have to come make Aliyah to Palestine. Now, Maurice, even though he shared her Zionist ideas, was not very passionate about it. and definitely not passionate about going to live on a kibbutz. And they went to live on Merchavia for 2 years. Golda, there's pictures of her in the farm and everything. She enjoyed the hard work, but Maurice found it very difficult. And after 2 years, they moved first to Jerusalem and then to Tel Aviv. Eventually, they separated, okay? They never, I don't know if they even ever got an official divorce, but they separated. Of course, he was a lot with the children because she was out in all these political adventures. And Golda had a few other love affairs with other politicians, Zalman Shazar and a few others. If you read her biographies, they have more details in them. I do recommend, there's a latest biography by Penina Lahav called The Only Woman in the World. I see some people, the only woman in the room. I see some people nodding, a very good biography. We can also ask her to come and speak on CSP. And she looks more of a feminist point of view on Golda Meir's figure. So yeah.
Thank you.
By the way, they're not buried side by side on Har Herzl. She's buried alone.
Really? Huh. Okay. Ending with this like shocking piece of information.
Yeah, there's so much information. And also, I don't know how many of you get to visit Denver, Colorado, but if you do, or if you know people who live in Colorado or Denver, Boulder, please send them to the museum. It's a fascinating short tour, and I know people will come out with a new perspective of Golda Meir. So worth it, definitely worth it.
Amazing. Sophia, thank you so much. I'm going to have so much fun creating the follow-up email for this one. Yeah, thank you again for opening our eyes to things that we don't know. And for me, really, there's something beautiful about revisiting something I think I know about and then looking at it from a completely different angle. So
thank you very much for the opportunity. It was also very interesting for me to research this and to discover new things. And I enjoyed so much. You guys are a wonderful crowd. Shirel, if we can save the chat so I can read the remarks afterwards, okay?
Yes, I'll do that and send it to you. Thank you, everyone. Lovely to see you. Looking forward to seeing you
Have
online.
a great afternoon. Bye.
Bye.